Hi, so I'm here today with Jeremy Chelot, CEO of Netomnia and Group, and also Mark Menzies, one of our directors here at 8 Advisory. Very happy to be with Jeremy as one of our clients at 8 Advisory, and also to talk to him a little bit about Take-Up Tracker. So, Jeremy, thanks ever so much for talking to us today. Those who've read the report will know you had a pretty good Q4. You're one of the rare altnets that's both growing penetration take-up, but also growing your footprint as well. So I'm sure we'll get into that, but we wanted to start with our sort of first question, which is, should we as an industry be concerned that altnet take-up has risen 1% in the last 6 months and Openreach has risen 3%? What's your views on that?
First of all, you have to compare apples with apples. So the Openreach take-up is not growing. They are actually losing lines on their footprint. Their migration and FTTP take-up is going well. And as you can imagine, a migration effort is significantly easier than adding customers on the network. So I think those two numbers, you can't really compare them. Now, if you look at the growth of customers on the altnet, it's actually growing relatively fast, because if you look at the churn on the network of BT, Virgin Media, Sky, and so on, the churn is in the region of 15% per annum. It means that on average, they lose about 1.3% per month. The growth in terms of ads for an altnet on average were in the region of 0.6, 0.7. My SP is faster than that. So on average, we do more like 0.8 to 0.9. We had a fantastic November where we managed to do 1%. But overall, it shows that as a percentage of the churn happening in a month, we take a disproportionate amount of all the customer churning and they go towards the altnet. So that will be a more interesting metric to look at the performance basically of the altnet, because if it carries on like that, we are going to take all their customers. I will expect at some point some form of equilibrium in the market, but maybe not. We haven't seen any slowdown, even in cohorts that are relatively mature, i.e. 3 to 4 years old. So no, I don't think we should be worried at all. If anything, with company stopping their build, the focus on take-up becomes even more important, and therefore you redirect all your energies and effort in filling up the network with as many customers as possible, and therefore competition becomes a lot more intense for the larger providers. So no, everything is fine.
Okay, well, I think it's a good call on churn. We'll have a look at that in our next iteration, probably in about 4 or 5 months' time.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. And Jeremy, just wanted to ask, changing tack a bit, how concerned are you about overbuild, both in terms of by altnets, by Virgin Media, nexfibre, and also Openreach? How does this impact on where you plan to build in future?
As I've always said, many other CEOs and investors believe that overbuilding with altnet is just stupid. It should never happen. Obviously, we've seen in the news recently the debate around nexfibre being the second largest altnet in the UK. First of all, the key question is, are they actually an altnet? You could argue that they are not. I think they are not an altnet, but I'm happy to add them into that category. And they are not the second largest altnet either, because we are. But if you look at also nexfibre and nexfibre overbuild, the argument there is, do you want to become basically the third fiber operator in an area? Because this is really what nexfibre and VMO2 are looking at potentially doing in the future. Is this is not just overbuilding an altnet. It's most of the time overbuilding an altnet with fiber in an area where there is Openreach FTTP, and therefore becoming the third fiber operator in an area. Should you be concerned about that? I've got some areas where nexfibre overbuilt me. My take-up is completely fine. My oldest cohort that you've seen on the chart has now actually a lot of nexfibre. And we've reached now 40% in those areas. So I think in general, overbuild is a bad thing. And I think 2 fiber operators, fine. 3 fiber operators starts becoming a lot. 3 fiber operators in an area, when you do not have a strict control on how you manage pricing, on your debt stack, becomes a very hard proposition. And I think we'll talk about ARPU later, because in reality, it can be very hard if you don't have the right levers to pull. For us, it's not a problem. We operate all the time in a 3 operators scenario where we've got OpenReach, we've got Virgin Media, and there is ourselves. But in general, as I say, overbuild to an altnet should never happen. If nexfibre is an altnet, they should equally not overbuild. Arriving basically the third in an area with fiber, you have to be ready to take on a fight, which is going to be intense. And finally, versus OpenReach FTTP, I haven't seen a major difference. Yes, there is a little bit of inertia at the beginning, and you will expect so. They migrate, they recontract, people just got a new install. They're not going to switch basically immediately. But you give them a couple of recontracting cycle or couple of mid-contract price rises cycle when they see basically the bill increases, and then you talk to them and then they want to switch, which completely makes sense. As a customer, when you go through that, you start looking at alternatives. So I'm not worried at all about OpenReach FTTP. And I think that in general, overbuilding is a bad thing.
So for the OpenReach, it's a bit of a timing thing with...
It's a bit of a timing. There's a little bit more inertia at the beginning, but then as soon as the inertia is gone, it rolls.
A lot of talk about pricing and ARPU. And you saw in our report that pricing's come down by about 4%, but there's still some people who can charge a premium if they're in a rural area with very low levels of competition or slow copper speeds. So do you think that current pricing and ARPU is sustainable for long-term business success? And then is it possible to walk it up? I suppose is the follow-on from that if it's not.
I mean, the more fundamental question is not what is the ARPU level. It's more, which ARPU do you need to achieve a return on your capital that can justify the capital that we spend in terms of upgrade and making sure that all the investors and the lenders make the return that they expect. And therefore, it's more a function of the cost of what you're doing, not so much a function of what is the average revenue per user. It's kind of the difference that you see with the UK government currently, where it's all about growth when you listen to the story, which is when we talk about ARPU, it's all about ARPU growth. People should be a lot more focused first on managing your cost. Because if you've managed your cost very well, it gives you a lot more levers that you can pull in order to invest, to deliver growth. And it gives you the ability to be a lot more patient in terms of ARPU growth. Therefore, you don't have to beat inflation like any of the price increases that you see in the UK, because you don't have that pressure to potentially meet some covenants or any other issue that you'll be faced with. So at £25 ARPU for us, we're completely fine. We're in the right place. When we look at our older cohorts, the ARPU is more in the region of 28, 29 pounds, sometimes as high as 30. So for us, as long as by the end of the decade, we get into the low 30s, we think we're in a very good place. And therefore, the requirement in terms of inflating basically our pricing for the next 5 years is pretty modest to get into that, because I say our oldest cohorts are already there. The newer cohorts are more in the 25 pounds. Therefore, it's not an issue. But if you have not managed your costs very well, you have to increase your ARPU. The problem with increasing your ARPU too fast is then you impact your take-up. If you impact your take-up, then it becomes a vicious circle, which is why you can see among the largest operators that drive towards trying to find a way to increase their ARPU to negate basically the effect of loss of customers. Overall, I think if right now you're in the region of 25 pounds with a clear path to the 30 pounds mark by the end of the decade, assuming obviously inflation and everything stays what they are currently, I think it's perfectly fine and it's perfectly justified in terms of competition that you might face from larger operators. Getting into some of the ARPUs that you see potentially low 20s or even sub 20s, it feels a bit too low for the UK. But at the same time, if you get to 90% take-up with an ARPU sub 20, that still works, because the question is, do you have the capital and can you sustain those costs? That number is quite hard to answer because it depends on the cost, it depends on the level of take-up that you're targeting. But for us with 25, even now, so it's similar to Vodafone, similar to TalkTalk, Definitely not at the level of BT, VM, or Sky. So that's why you see that there's potentially some margin to actually drag it up slowly, but you don't want to do what other providers are doing, i.e. mid-contract price rises and do all those things that do not create customer loyalty, customer advocacy, and therefore for us, we don't want to do any of those things.
Cool. All comes down again to capital efficiency, doesn't it? And if you're just gives you more opportunities if you've been very efficient on your build.
Manage your cost and life becomes a lot easier.
Your focus really is on take up, given you're capital efficient, and you can walk the ARPUs back later. Just coming to your take up, your cohort performance is pretty impressive. The chart you provided of the cohorts attracted a lot of interest when we published the report. So essentially the chart is showing a trend towards 30% take up on your mature cohorts and a real strong correlation between the longer the cohorts have been in market, the higher the take up. Is this what you're expecting to see with those newer, more high volume cohorts, that the longer the network is in the market, the higher the take up you will achieve?
Yes, as a short answer. And sometimes when people look at our cohort charts, they think that we play with the scales, the x-axis, because it looks more linear. So everybody is expecting the line to taper down basically or start flatlining a lot quicker, whereas currently you could almost draw a line basically going through all the points. In reality, we just don't know. My network is now a bit more than 4 years old. When you look at take-up, you look at it over 5, 7, maybe 10 years. So there are lots of questions around about where is the ceiling. So is there a ceiling? There are quite a few networks that are now a lot more than 5 years old, sometimes 10 years old, where you see actually the cohort getting to 50% and then carry on. What I've never heard of is cohort that stops growing. I'm yet to actually find basically that story that you reach that magical point of a number, and then basically it's like flat. I stop growing. I haven't seen also the declining one. There might be some story around that, but to a certain extent, it's linked to the previous question around ARPU. So if tomorrow I were to increase actually our average revenue per user to a similar level to Virgin Media or to BT or to Sky, I think you will see my cohort growing a lot slower, flatlining, having to manage a lot more churn. I think right now we are competitive, and therefore, as long as we keep that a healthy level between our ARPU and the ARPU of our competitors, there's no reason for it to stop growing. Obviously, at some point, there will be the people, okay, if you don't have a TV service, I'm not going to buy from you. There will be the people who will never change because they are loyal to a brand, and the people who do that, there is a level of market share I will struggle to break until I have a proposition which is a bit more complete. And that's why we are planning to launch, for example, a mobile service at some point this year, because I think otherwise there is a segment of the market that you can never tap. There might be people who have been with BT for 30 years and they will never change, and it's completely fine too. So I think there is a ceiling based on the product, there is a ceiling based on just the brand. But as long as you keep a healthy price with a speed which is at least equal or faster and a very good customer service, I think you can go much higher than what we are targeting. We are targeting currently 33% after 5 years. Currently, it sounds like we are getting there more in a 4-year type of period. When there is OpenReach FTTP, it takes a bit longer. We think we get there closer to the 5-year period than the 4 years. So it's about 20% longer for us because of that inertia. At the beginning, it just keeps going. And I haven't seen all my peers, we've seen the same thing. So we have networks now that have a huge OpenReach FTTP overbuild. My network is more than 50% overbuilt by OpenReach FTTP. Community fiber is the same, city fiber is the same. You see that through looking at data from Think Broadband, and yet those cohorts are still growing in a way which is very healthy. Why is the ceiling? I don't know. I'm sure there is one.
We'll see where we get to. We want to keep our tracker going on a sort of rolling 6-monthly basis. So be really interesting to see how the whole industry's done in 6 months, and also how much closer you are. You think about it, if there's 3 networks and 90% of people end up on fiber, should be about 30% each, shouldn't it? And then maybe a bit more for the better ones. So
that's where I started. That's why my business plan always had basically that magic, basically 30% in it. I say my oldest cohort now is at close to 40%. Therefore, there is a genuine question, where does it stop? Or maybe as competition basically intensify, your oldest cohort, they go to 40, your youngest cohort, they might hit a ceiling at 25 and overall it might blend to the 30% mark. I genuinely don't know. I just know that it has not stopped. So it carries on growing. The growth is more linear than everybody expected. OpenReach has overbuilt us at more than 50%, and yet we are still doing take-up records every month. So far, I haven't seen the marker basically of that ceiling or penetration that just slows down significantly. But who knows? At some point, they might increase their speed, drop their pricing, and improve customer service to a level where my life becomes a lot more difficult. And then we'll fight a bit more.
It's going to be a fascinating couple of years, and be good to keep looking at this and talking about it every 6 months or so. So, Jeremy, thank you again ever so much for your time. Really good to talk to you. We'll talk soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.